Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into some highly anticipated and frankly urgent findings from the 2025 Show Racism the Red Card report. It's titled, A Work in Progress, Understanding Racism and Anti-Racism in Welsh Educational Settings. This is a massive piece of research that pulls from surveys, pupil-led research, and staff observations from nearly 1,500 individuals to build a really vivid picture of what children, young people, and educators are currently experiencing across Wales.
Before we get into the numbers, let's ground ourselves for a second. Dean Pimble, the campaign manager for Wales, hits the nail on the head right at the start of this report. He reminds us that we're not just looking at abstract data points on a spreadsheet today. We are looking at real, human accounts of harm and exclusion. These are the lived experiences of students and educators, and they underscore a deeply urgent need for systemic change in our educational spaces. To make sense of all this, we're going to logically walk through 5 key areas. First, the changing Welsh population. Then, evolving language and definitions. Next, the progress, prevalence, and gaps we're seeing. After that, how racism manifests across different age groups. And finally, the path forward. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, a changing Welsh population and the demographic shift we're experiencing. If you look at the 2021 census data, it is abundantly clear that Wales is becoming a much more diverse nation. We've seen a noticeable shift. Back in 2011, the population was 95.6% white. By 2021, that dropped to 93.8%, and we're seeing significant, vibrant growth in Asian and mixed heritage communities. The actual makeup of our local communities is fundamentally changing. And here's a number that really puts the future into perspective. 9.2%. That is the percentage of all 0 to 15-year-olds in Wales who now come from minoritized ethnic backgrounds. So think about it. When nearly 1 in 10 kids in your school system comes from a diverse background, anti-racist education literally cannot be an optional add-on anymore. It's an absolute necessity if we want all of our young people to actually thrive.
Moving right along to part 2, evolving language and definitions, and naming the experience.
Now, there's a really fascinating contrast in how we define this issue. By law, specifically the Equality Act 2010, racism is strictly defined as racial discrimination. But the report takes a much broader and arguably more realistic approach. It recognizes racism as an entire system of power that perpetuates prejudice and oppression. It looks at how things like skin color, religion, nationality, and culture are all deeply intertwined. For example, it acknowledges how a person with brown skin might incorrectly be assumed to be Muslim and then targeted with Islamophobia. It's all connected.
You'll also notice a very deliberate shift in the language being used here. Instead of acronyms like BAMI, the report uses the term global majority. And honestly, the why here is important. People from these backgrounds actually make up over 80% of the population on Earth. It's a conscious choice intended to empower folks who have historically been disempowered by racism. It completely reframes the whole conversation, right?
Okay, on to part 3, progress, prevalence, and gaps from the educator perspective.
It is super important to remember that this report isn't just a random, one-off snapshot. Show Racism the Red Card has been tracking these exact issues in Wales for a decade, with previous reports in 2016 and 2020. So this 2025 milestone gives us a really clear picture of the actual trends over time.
And the good news is the data shows some massive progress. A whopping 77% of educators surveyed say they now feel confident recognizing racist incidents in their schools. That is a huge leap from just 48% back in 2020. So clearly, the hard work and dedication put into training existing and future educators is really paying off. On top of that, an overwhelming 87% of educators believe that anti-racism training is directly beneficial for their staff. You know, there's a really strong, growing appetite out there for this kind of professional development.
And an even higher number, 89%, believe this training is absolutely essential for the children and young people they look after. The educational workforce gets it. They see the immense value in this work. But, okay, here's the catch. And it's one of the most critical findings in the whole report. Despite teachers feeling more confident, there is a stark reporting gap, especially in secondary schools. Basically, pupils are reporting that racism is far more widespread than was actually being officially logged by staff. The lived reality of these students just isn't matching up with the paperwork.
So what's causing this gap? Well, it's complicated by a few things. First, we've got these patchy tick-box curriculums. When diverse history is only taught through a lens of trauma, like focusing entirely on enslavement instead of excellence, that limited knowledge can actually be weaponized by students to target their global majority peers. Second,
Global majority educators themselves are saying they just aren't getting adequate support after racist incidents occur. And third, teachers are seeing a huge influence from unmoderated, racist online spaces that are radicalizing kids outside of school hours.
Which leads us perfectly into part 4, racism across age groups, and how it actually manifests depending on how old a child is.
The research points out a very clear behavioral divide here. With older kids, racist incidents lean heavily into established stereotyping. But for the younger children, racism usually looks more like social exclusion, deliberately leaving individuals out or highlighting their differences in a derogatory way.
And this is exactly why early intervention is so critical. Little kids often just don't have the vocabulary to talk about difference properly. Because they aren't equipped with the words for skin color or religion, they try to make sense of it using these clumsy and sometimes really hurtful frames of reference from their own little worlds, like comparing someone's skin color to chocolate buttons. They desperately need the language to navigate diversity safely. Now, here's a really fascinating twist involving regional and linguistic differences. The report shows that the type of racism experienced literally shifts depending on the medium of the school. In English medium schools, pupils are way more likely to express misconceptions around immigration. But flip that to Welsh language secondary schools, and you'll find children are more likely to be targeted directly based on their skin color or religion. All right, let's wrap this up with part 5, the path forward and recommendations for real change.
So, how do we fix this? The report lays out some highly structured, systemic steps. Step 1, the Welsh government needs to explicitly state how racism disclosure is tied directly into safeguarding duties. Step 2, we've got to standardize how these incidents are recorded so it's consistent across every local authority. Step 3, put real funding into direct, high-quality anti-racism youth work. And Step 4, schools need to sit down and co-create meaningful, child-friendly anti-racism policies with the students themselves.
But it goes beyond just writing new policies, right? We have to equip our students with robust critical thinking skills so they can combat that online radicalization we talked about earlier. We also need to ensure our mental health resources are specifically tailored to understand and address racial trauma. And finally, schools literally can't do this alone. They need to actively integrate with their local communities and families to make anti-racism a true collective effort. So here is the crucial thought I want to leave you with today as we close out this explainer. Knowing what we know now, knowing there is this massive gap between the official school records and the actual lived reality of the students walking those hallways, what will you do to ensure every child feels safe, respected, and valued? How are you going to take action to build a truly anti-racist future for Wales?